All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into Venezuela.
Ooh,
A country that's, well, it's been through a lot lately.
It has been in the news a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah, and we're going to try to explore, what makes this country tick.
Yeah.
Its geography, its people, the forces that have shaped its destiny.
I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn just how much there is to Venezuela beyond those headlines.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing this deep dive, right? To get people thinking a little bit deeper about it.
Sure.
I was reading about Venezuela and I was blown away by the extremes.
Yeah.
You have the Pico Bolivar,
Right.
this towering peak that's covered in snow.
Yeah.
And then practically in the same breath, you're talking about the Coro region.
Right.
With these sweeping sand dunes.
It's an amazing contrast.
It's incredible. How can one country have it all?
Well, and that's the thing. It's that geographical diversity that makes Venezuela so fascinating. It's recognized as one of the world's megadiverse countries, which means it's got this incredible array of plant and animal life that you won't find anywhere else.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But help me wrap my head around that.
Sure.
So we're talking about 5 distinct geographical regions, right?
That's right.
The Andes, the massive mountains.
Yep, those are incredible.
The Orinoco Plains, this vast expanse that goes on forever.
Seems like it, right?
And then you got the Maracaibo lowlands, the Guiana highlands, and even Caribbean islands.
Wow.
It's like several countries packed into one.
It really is. And each of those regions has its own kind of unique ecosystem, its own character.
Okay.
And that influences everything from where people settle to the kind of work they do, even the cultural differences that emerge.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's all connected.
Yeah.
I was reading about the Orinoco River, and it doesn't just flow in one direction like most rivers.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
It splits.
It does.
It's called a bifurcation.
Yeah. That's a good word for it.
And a portion of the Orinoco's flow goes into the Amazon basin,
That's right.
creating this massive island that's bigger than some European countries.
Yeah. You could spend a lifetime exploring that region alone and not see everything.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's a river with a mind of its own.
It really is.
But let's talk about the people who live amidst all this natural wonder.
Okay.
The sources mention that over 88% of Venezuelans live in urban areas.
Yeah. That's a really high percentage, isn't it?
That's a huge contrast to those sparsely populated Guiana highlands that we were talking about.
It really is. And, it kind of speaks volumes about the country's uneven development.
Right.
You have these bustling cities, teeming with activity.
Yeah.
And then these vast remote areas where indigenous groups like the Wayuu and the Warao live.
Yeah.
And often face incredible challenges.
Yeah, it's like 2 different worlds coexisting within the same borders.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And then there's the elephant in the room.
Oh, boy.
The mass exodus of Venezuelans in recent years.
Yeah, it's a real human tragedy, isn't it?
Over 7 million people have fled their homes due to economic hardship and political instability.
That's right. And, to put that in perspective, that's like almost the entire population of Switzerland.
Wow. Yeah, that's hard to even fathom.
It is. It really is a reminder of how quickly things can change.
Yeah.
And I think, people might be surprised to hear this, but Venezuela was once ranked very high in global happiness surveys.
Really?
Yeah. But today, it's grappling with hyperinflation, shortages of basic necessities, a healthcare system that's really struggling.
Yeah.
We're talking about resurgence of diseases like malaria,
Oh, wow.
rising child mortality rates. It's a far cry from the Venezuela of just a few decades ago.
It's really sad to hear that.
It is.
But let's try to understand how Venezuela got to this point.
Okay.
The sources really emphasize the role of oil
Yeah.
in shaping the country's destiny.
That's a big part of the story.
It's this liquid gold that's both blessed and cursed Venezuela, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a great way to put it. In the 20th century, Venezuela experienced this period of incredible wealth, fueled by those vast oil reserves.
Yeah.
And for a time, it was one of the wealthiest nations in South America.
Wow.
But, that wealth was built on a really shaky foundation.
Because it created this dependence, this rentier economy where everything revolved around oil.
Exactly. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
When oil prices were high, Venezuela was riding high.
Yeah.
But that reliance meant that other sectors got neglected. Agriculture, education, diversification.
So it was a ticking time bomb, just waiting to explode.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's one way to look at it.
And then came the oil price collapse in the 1980s.
Right.
And that hit Venezuela hard.
It was a devastating blow, and it really exposed, the inherent weaknesses of that system. The Venezuelan economy went into a tailspin, and, it's kind of a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting all your faith in a single commodity.
Right.
And so you had this economic crisis that laid bare all those problems and, really set the stage for the rise of Hugo Chavez.
Okay.
And what he called the Bolivarian Revolution.
Chavez, a figure who continues to spark a lot of debate.
He does.
Strong opinions on all sides.
Absolutely.
What exactly was he promising to change?
Well, Chavez's rise was really a direct consequence of that discontent and inequality that had been brewing for decades.
Yeah.
He tapped into that frustration, and he promised to break Venezuela free from that dependence on oil.
Right.
Distribute the wealth more fairly.
Okay.
Create a more socially just society.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He called it the Bolivarian Revolution, a nod to Simon Bolivar, the South American liberator.
Yeah. I mean, he was trying to evoke that legacy of, freedom and self-determination.
And it sounds like he was trying to really shake things up.
Oh, he absolutely was. He introduced these policies focused on nationalization.
Okay.
Taking control of key industries, expanding social welfare programs. He was a very vocal critic of U.S. foreign policy. He wanted to forge alliances with countries like Cuba and Russia.
So it was a radical shift from the status quo.
It was a big change and, sent shockwaves through the region and beyond. But his policies were incredibly controversial. They divided public opinion and, led to accusations of authoritarianism and economic mismanagement.
So it was a mixed bag.
It was a mixed bag, for sure.
And then after Chavez's death, Nicolas Maduro took over.
That's right.
Is that when things really started to unravel?
Well, Maduro inherited a country that was already facing immense challenges.
Okay.
The transition was full of tension.
Yeah.
Protests erupted, political instability intensified, and the international community, particularly the U.S., imposed sanctions on the Maduro government.
Right.
And that really further complicated the situation.
Yeah, so we've got this backdrop of economic turmoil, political change, a history heavily shaped by oil. But what about the political system itself? Venezuela is a democracy, at least on paper, right?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And where I think the disconnect between those ideals and the reality on the ground becomes really apparent. So, Venezuela's constitution outlines a presidential democracy with checks and balances. But many argue that under Maduro, the country has drifted toward authoritarianism.
Wow, that's a serious term.
It is.
What evidence is there to support that?
Well, there are concerns about increasing control over institutions, including the media. And, you've got reports from organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International pointing to potential human rights violations. There's been documented media censorship. And even cases where access to websites has been blocked. So, it raises serious questions about freedom of speech and the rule of law.
Right, okay, so this is crackdown on dissent. Attempts to control the narrative. What about this homeland card that keeps popping up in the sources?
Okay, the homeland card.
It sounds pretty ominous.
Well, it's this government-issued ID card. And it's supposed to grant you access to social programs and subsidized goods. Which, sounds good on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But critics argue that it's actually a tool for social control and political manipulation.
Okay, hold on. If it's supposed to help people access essential services, how can it be a tool for control?
Well, the fear is that it's being used to tie access to basic necessities like food and healthcare to political loyalty. Imagine being denied food or medicine because you didn't vote for the ruling party.
Oh, wow.
That's the concern.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought.
It is.
It really makes you think about the fragility of democratic institutions, how easily they can be eroded. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from those dramatic landscapes to these complex sociopolitical realities. And it's clear that Venezuela is facing immense challenges.
It is a story of stark contrasts, of immense potential, but also of deep struggles.
But amidst all of this, there's also this vibrant culture, this resilience that seems to shine through.
I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, it's a country of arepas.
Oh, yeah.
Infectious joropo music.
Love it.
And a passion for baseball that's almost a religion.
It's true.
Tell me more about this cultural side of Venezuela.
Okay.
Because I think we need a bit of hope right now.
We do. You're right. amidst the hardships, there's this spirit, this vibrancy that just refuses to be extinguished. Venezuela has this rich cultural heritage.
Right.
And it's that cultural identity that's really helping people cope with the difficult realities that they face.
Okay, we're going to pick up right there.
Sounds good.
When we return for part 2.
Looking forward to
of our deep dive into Venezuela.
Absolutely.
We're back. And before the break, we were talking about that vibrant culture that seems to be helping Venezuelans cope with some pretty tough times.
It's true. You know, culture can be a powerful source of strength and resilience, especially when things are tough.
Absolutely. And you know what always fascinates me?
What's that?
Food.
Ah, yes.
Every culture has its own unique flavors and traditions, right?
Absolutely. Food is like a window into a culture's soul, isn't it?
I love that. Yeah. And in Venezuela, it seems like arepas are more than just a dish.
Oh, yeah.
They're like a symbol of the country.
You could say that arepas are like the heart and soul of Venezuelan cuisine.
Okay. Tell me more about them.
Well, there are these cornmeal cakes that are incredibly versatile. You
Sure.
can grill them, bake them, fry them, and you can fill them with just about anything you can imagine.
So it's like a blank canvas for culinary creativity.
Precisely. And I think that speaks to the adaptability and resourcefulness of Venezuelan culture.
Yeah.
Even in times of scarcity, people find ways to make delicious and satisfying meals with whatever ingredients they can get their hands on.
Yeah, that's really impressive.
It is.
I was reading that there are like endless variations of arepas.
Oh, there are.
And they're eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Any time of day.
Have you ever tried one filled with shredded beef and plantains?
Oh, absolutely. That's a classic.
Yeah.
And you can't forget about the arepas filled with black beans and cheese. Those are a personal favorite.
Okay, now I'm officially craving arepas.
Okay.
We'll have to find a Venezuelan restaurant after this deep dive.
Let's do it.
But let's move beyond the culinary delights for a moment.
Okay.
And talk about, daily life in Venezuela. What's it like for the average person navigating this complex reality that we've been discussing?
Well, it's certainly not easy. As we mentioned before, the economic crisis has had a profound impact on daily life.
Right.
Things that many of us take for granted, like having access to food, medicine, basic necessities, have become major struggles for many Venezuelans.
I can imagine.
Imagine standing in line for hours just to buy a loaf of bread.
Wow.
Or facing that agonizing decision of whether to buy food or medicine for your family.
That's heartbreaking to think about.
It is. It's a really tough situation.
And then there's the issue of personal safety.
Right.
The sources mentioned that crime rates are extremely high.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And that just adds another layer of stress and anxiety to daily life.
It does. The combination of economic hardship, political instability, and a breakdown of law and order has created an environment where crime can flourish.
Yeah.
People are constantly worried about their safety, about being robbed, or worse.
So we've got this economic crisis, political instability, high crime rates, a healthcare system that's really struggling.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot to process. It makes you wonder what the future holds for Venezuela.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Venezuela's at a crossroads, and predicting the future is always a tricky business, especially in such a volatile situation.
Right.
But one thing's for sure, the Venezuelan people have a long history of resilience, of overcoming adversity.
Yeah, we've seen that throughout this deep dive.
They've weathered storms before, and they have this incredible spirit, this hope for a brighter future that I think we need to acknowledge.
Yeah, from those geographical challenges to the economic and political turmoil, there's this underlying sense of perseverance, this determination to keep going, to find a way forward.
Absolutely. And, think about El Sistema, that incredible youth orchestra program we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's a shining example of how, even amidst hardship and uncertainty, beauty and hope can emerge.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It's a testament to the power of music and art to transcend those difficult circumstances and provide a sense of purpose and community.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are always those glimmers of hope,
Yeah.
sparks of resilience that can ignite change.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, the challenges facing Venezuela are immense.
They are.
What can the international community do to support a peaceful and democratic transition?
Well, that's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the challenges facing Venezuela. But it's important to remember that every individual has the power to make a difference.
Okay, how so?
By raising awareness, advocating for change, supporting humanitarian efforts, and holding those in power accountable.
So you're saying that we can't afford to turn a blind eye to what's happening in Venezuela, even though it might feel like a world away.
Exactly. It's about staying informed, engaging in meaningful conversations, and demanding that our leaders prioritize policies that promote peace, stability, and human rights.
Yeah.
We have a moral obligation to speak out against injustice and to support those who are fighting for a better future.
Well said. And with that, we're going to shift gears and explore Venezuela's relationship with the international community.
Okay, sounds good.
It's a complicated web of alliances, sanctions, and geopolitical maneuvering that's worth unpacking.
Absolutely. It's a crucial part of the story, and it helps us understand Venezuela's place in the world today.
We're back, and now we're diving headfirst into the world of geopolitics.
Okay.
Venezuela's place on the global stage is, put it mildly,
Yeah.
we're talking sanctions,
Right.
political standoffs, a whole lot of tension. Help me make sense of it all.
Sure.
Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Venezuela's story on the world stage is really deeply intertwined with its oil wealth.
Right.
For decades, it was a major player in the global energy market, and that really shaped its relationships with other countries.
Okay.
It had power, it had influence, and it wasn't afraid to use it.
Right. And then there's that whole Bolivarian Revolution angle we discussed earlier.
Right.
Hugo Chavez, with his vision of a socialist Latin America and his fiery rhetoric against U.S. foreign policy. Definitely ruffled some feathers.
He did.
It's like he threw a wrench into the geopolitical machinery.
He absolutely did. Chavez was a very vocal critic of what he saw as U.S. imperialism. And he wasn't shy about forging alliances with countries that were also at odds with the U.S.,
Right.
places like Cuba, China, Russia. And this created a lot of friction, especially with the United States, which saw Chavez's moves as a direct challenge to its interests in the region.
So you've got this historical backdrop of oil wealth.
Right.
And this bold anti-establishment stance.
Yeah.
Where does that leave Venezuela today
Oh.
in terms of its relationships with other countries?
Yeah, a complicated picture, to say the least.
Okay.
Venezuela has found itself increasingly isolated, particularly in the Western Hemisphere.
Okay.
The U.S. and many Latin American countries have imposed sanctions on the Maduro government,
Right.
citing concerns about human rights violations, a crackdown on democratic institutions, a lack of legitimacy.
It sounds like Venezuela's walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's trying to maintain its ideological stance, its vision of a socialist alternative, its alliances with countries that share those views. But on the other hand, its economy is in shambles,
Yeah.
and it desperately needs foreign investment
Right.
and access to global markets.
It's a classic catch-22.
Yeah.
Venezuela's political situation makes it very difficult to attract the kind of economic partnerships that it needs to get back on its feet.
Right.
And then there's the issue of humanitarian aid.
Yeah, we've seen those heartbreaking scenes of aid convoys being blocked at the border
Exactly.
with the government and the opposition blaming each other for the impasse.
Yeah, it's a really tragic situation.
It's a tragedy on a massive scale.
It is.
Millions of Venezuelans have fled the country, seeking refuge in neighboring countries, and those who remain are facing really dire circumstances.
It's true.
What's the way forward?
That's the question, isn't it?
What can be done to address this incredibly complex situation?
There are no easy answers. Some advocate for stronger sanctions, hoping to pressure the Maduro government into making concessions and restoring democratic norms. Others argue that dialogue and negotiation are the only way out,
Right.
believing that isolation will only worsen the situation and harm the Venezuelan people.
It's a tough call.
It is.
There's no quick fix.
No.
This is a situation that requires really careful consideration,
Yeah.
diplomacy, a willingness to listen to all sides, a commitment to finding solutions that put the well-being of the Venezuelan people first.
I think that's key.
And that's exactly what we've tried to do in this deep dive.
Right.
We've explored Venezuela's dramatic landscapes, its vibrant culture, its complex history, and the very real challenges that it faces today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've delved into the political and economic turmoil, the humanitarian crisis, and the country's complicated relationship with the international community.
For sure.
We've covered a lot of ground, but we've only scratched the surface
That's true.
of this complex and evolving story.
Yeah, the story's still being written.
Yeah.
And the future of Venezuela remains uncertain. But one thing is for sure,
What's that?
the Venezuelan people deserve our support and solidarity as they navigate this really challenging chapter in their history.
Couldn't agree more.
They deserve our attention, our empathy, and our commitment to finding solutions that will help them build a more peaceful, just, and prosperous future.
Well said. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into Venezuela.
It's been a fascinating journey.
We hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of this fascinating and troubled nation.
We encourage you to continue exploring this topic.
Yeah, stay engaged.
Stay engaged with the ongoing developments and use your voice to advocate for positive change.
Absolutely.
The story is far from over,
Right.
and your informed perspective can contribute to a more compassionate and effective response from the global community.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Venezuela.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.